Hello, and welcome again, everybody, to another edition of Masters Interviews. If you don't know what this is, it's a podcast-style chat with somebody vastly more experienced and interesting in the wargaming hobby than me, with the idea being that it's something you can listen to while you paint and get a bit of knowledge, particularly if you're a beginner or intermediate, from some people who you might have heard of or might not have heard of. And I'm delighted to say that our guest for this edition is Tim Whitworth, who has got a cracking Facebook page or two. He's a founder member of something called Like a Stone Wall Wargames group, which have got a big Facebook page following, and he also runs the Eagles and Lions Wargaming Facebook page, which have inspired many people. And Tim's got a long history, and he's somebody who he's on Facebook, but he's not like me. He's not everywhere. He's not on Instagram. He's not on Twitter. He's really well known within the hobby, but you might not stumble across him on something like Twitter or Instagram like you might find someone like me. So I thought he's an ideal person to introduce to people who are a little bit newer to the hobby like me. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Chris. That was a fantastic intro. I'm just waiting for this famous person to come along. Who's he going to be?
You're waiting for This Is Your Life music.
Indeed so. Where's that Irishman? Oh no, he's dead now. Hi, anyway.
Yeah, hello. So the way we're going to do this is we tend to do these in two bits, Tim. So we do the typical bits and pieces first. We rattle through those. There's sort of questions that many are sort of stalwart has had to answer over the years in some format, and then we go into my sort of slightly more modern take on questions in the hobby as a sort of young outsider sort of thing, or coming into the hobby as a younger person sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So we always kick off with, and I know we should disclose that we do know each other, and that I've been kicking around with Like a Stone Wall / yourself now for a couple of years.
Is it as long as that? Good Lord.
It's getting on. I think it's approaching for a couple of years, yeah.
Have you signed a contract?
Yeah, it's well more than a year.
Have you signed a contract?
Is there an initiation ceremony on this as well, by the way?
That's been deferred due to lockdown.
Do I have to paint 1,000 of Barry's Napoleonics or something?
Yes. At least.
Yeah, I thought I might. Yeah. So what we do is, so Tim's based in Mansfield, which is in Nottinghamshire in the UK, if you're listening from other places, which is part of the Lead Belt. And Tim, tell everybody about when you first got into wargaming. So when you very first picked up any form of miniature and stuck it on a table or painted it. Do you remember how it happened?
Oh, good Lord. That's now going back into ancient history. You would be taking me all the way back to the early to mid-60s if you wanted to go in for the first miniature.
Far? Wow.
I am one of those strange people that started off with Airfix figures. But I suppose that in the background was the seed that was already sown when I went into grammar school in 1970, and on my third day there, myself and a friend were walking on the first Friday night, leaving school after the first week, and went past our art class, looked through the windows, and there were a gang of older chaps within the school and the art teacher all playing what transplanted to be a war game. Right. And we were invited in, and it started from there, so to speak. So 1970 is a big point, which makes it 50 years this year.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
It does, and it seems to have flown by, quite frankly. Yeah. Within a week of being there, I was in Mansfield Wargames Club, which in those days was part of the Notts Wargames Association. Right. And I suppose whilst you introduced Mansfield as being part of the Lead Belt, back in 1970 there was no Games Workshop here. But having said that, Notts Wargames Association was a phenomenally large group of 3 clubs within the Nottinghamshire area, one at Mansfield, one at Nottingham, and one at Eastwood. With a huge membership, probably 200 people back then.
I think that's huge, isn't it?
In the country, yeah.
I mean, yeah. I say I don't want to do the hobby down now because I think it's doing tremendously well. But what happened? Do you know what I mean? Like, what?
I don't know. I mean, it's strange. As I say, I was having a discussion with somebody recently, and they basically said it's when Brian Ansell brought Citadel and then Wargames, Games Workshop into Nottingham. But I think the ground was already ripe for sowing that set of seeds. So there's always been a very strong wargaming interest within the county. But what happened obviously was when Brian did acquire Games Workshop, he was originally up at Newark.
This was in the 90s, was it?
Yeah, now this would be around about 1979, 1980, early 80s.
Right. Okay.
And so it sort of mushroomed from then on. But with that groundswell that was already there.
Sold in the 90s, didn't he? Sorry,
yeah.
Parted ways in the 90s. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I remember going to his works over in, I think it was on Victoria Street over in Newark, when he was casting Citadel figures, and that's really going back in the day. I've got vivid memories of going and fetching figures from him then. But there were other players about. There was Asgard Miniatures up in the Lace Market, long gone now, but that morphed into Tumbling Dice.
Right.
Tumbling Dice was originally with Asgard, and of course the famous tabletop games were in Arnold, and bless his soul, is no longer with us, Bob Connor, who had this vast publishing facility for loads and loads of rules that came out of that stable, and really set the scene for things at a time when you would really only get Wargames research group rules finding their way around on the market. So tabletop games were a regular drop off from me on my way back home from working in Nottingham.
Right.
And that in itself spawned something else with Pete Brown at the Assault Group. Pete used to work for Bob in his casting room there. So yeah, so it's one thing begat another, and so it grew and so it grew.
Wow. So that being said, then, do you think that? I mean, it sounds a little bit like if there ever was a golden age, that might be long gone. Or do you feel like that now or not?
No, I don't. No? I look back at that with pleasant memories towards those times, but we were really at the start of a very long journey. Things were very much basic in those days. I remember my figure collection didn't start to take off until probably the mid-80s. Through the 70s, I'd been competing national championships and what then became in the mid-80s the world championships. But that's the time when my figure collection really started to get off. When
that's one of the sort of questions of this section is: do you know your first army was, like your first completed army? What was it that you gained?
Well, the first army that I was using competitively was a modern British. Well, we call it modern now, but we would look back and say it was a 1980s potential Third World War style army.
Wow.
Which now I think it's really strange, because we used to call it ultra modern then, and now you're looking back and you're thinking, God knows, that's 40 years ago. And that was a 1/300th scale army made from Skytrex models of Wimswold. Somewhere I will have it. Yeah,
brilliant.
Somewhere. I also have a 15mm Mike's Models Samurai Army, which was a wedding present from my wife. And I must get around to painting it soon, because we've been married 40 years.
Oh no! Don't say things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't know where that one is. It's buried somewhere in the lead pile.
Yeah. So to modern day, then, sort of thing. You're still very active. You got an incredible collection, which we'll talk a little bit about more in a bit. But you still, for people that don't know, Like a Stone Wall put on these incredible display games at events like Partisan in the UK, in Nottinghamshire. Most recently winning Best Participation Game.
Yes, we took a diversion last year to move away from demonstration games. Just just for the hell of it, really, because we felt we got an opportunity to share a particular game with showgoers, and so we went in for a participation game regarding I Ain't Been Shot Mum, which is the World War II set by Two Fat Lardies. And that's always been done to death in Western Desert and Northeast Europe, 44, 45. So we thought, well, why not let's get some Pacific stuff into this. So we did Peleliu, which was highly successful, very interesting to take part in, very much a group activity, a lot of terrain to be made for it that we'd not got beforehand. We were making that from scratch. And a lot of figures to put on the table that had not been seen out there for before. So, and it was well received. There were a lot of TFL games at that particular show.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was strange. We were surrounded with Mike Whitaker's D-Day landings next door to us. We'd got Peleliu landings. And adjacent to us, we'd got John Savage with his ancient version, prototype of Sharp Practice, which strangely enough has morphed with the work that they've done with TFL into Infamy, which is strange how that's come through as well very recently. But yes, that was a slight deviation from the work we'd done in Like a Stonewall Group, and that Stonewall Group is 25 years old now. That's just got past in the blink of an eye. We got bored with the competitive scene. It got a little bit samey, and in some respects it got rather stressful. The World Championships, as they were, particularly with their playoffs and then their finals, were using Swiss systems, and it would be 4 games in a weekend, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and the same on a Sunday. Very little time to see shows, very intensive. And quite honestly, I got to a point where I'd come away from a weekend supposedly of fun with most almighty headache.
Knackered, basically.
Absolutely. Mentally drained. So there's got to be something better than this. So Barry Foster, the other founder member, and I were at a partisan show, and we decided, hey, let's see if we can get into some demonstration games. It had not been the first time I'd done demonstration games. I remember whilst at Mansfield Club, we'd had a couple of seasons there. Dave Andrews, another local famous name, figure designer for Games Workshop, and I had done particularly well at the Sheffield Triple Show in the early 80s with a Lake Pipers 1242, the Ice Slaughter game, which is Teutonic Knights versus Alexander Nevsky. And we'd come away with best demonstration game of the show there. But that had been some time before, so Barry and I resurrected this idea, and it went from strength to strength. We picked up 2 or 3 new members, and at that point we'd got a group of about 5 people, that's all. And it was intense, but it paid off, and I think in all we targeted York Show and the Partisans and Hammerhead and the World Championships in the main as about 5 or so. We'd taken it to 1 or 2 other shows hither and thither, but the size of the games were getting up to 40 feet by 9 feet, and sometimes even bigger with intricate cutouts in the tables. And we were wanting large shows to take these to, but the World Championships, I think, I'm not entirely sure, over the 25 years, we won the title Best Demonstration Game around about a dozen times.
That's amazing.
But the thing is with that is, of course, the hobby has grown and continues to get better, and the standard bar rises every time. And we're all getting on a bit now as well, quite frankly. So And also the painted lead pile gets bigger and bigger, as do the collections. And so we've sort of waned off these last couple of years, but that been a very successful 25 years.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that leads me on to the next question. Really. I mean, have you never had a break from the hobby in those? I mean, have you been at it pretty much on and off that whole time? Have you ever had an elongated break?
Absolutely, it's strange. I don't think I can recall a time when I've not been wargaming. If it's not been my primary hobby, it may have been a sort of secondary hobby. But
so you've never packed up for a year or anything like that and come back? No.
Only recently. I suffered a stroke 18 months ago and decided that for health reasons and trying to get fit and what have you, that I would take 2020 off and to take a break from like a Stonewall activities, not finish wargaming entirely, but it looks like it's been a thing that's caught on and gone around the world, because it looks like everybody's been taking a break in 2020.
Well, I think the world's taken 2020 off.
I think it's been struck off the calendar as far as the year's concerned.
It's done. We've completed 2020.
Absolutely. So that's been a strange experience. But now I've been gaming all the way through, and I don't know about you, Chris, but it's in your blood sometimes. I think.
Yeah, I can't stop now.
No,
do you know what I mean? It's funny, isn't it? Yeah, I just can't stop finding new things to do, trying new things. I can't paint fast enough. I just want to paint everything and in sight and.
Yes. Yeah. And it becomes a bit like a kid in a sweet shop. Attitude, if you're not careful, that you want to be starting several periods all at once.
Yeah, I do have to try and control that.
You do have to have that control and restraint. I mean, I'm flitting around at this moment in time between several armies that are on the paint deck now. I've probably got 3 armies on the go for 3 different projects, and this is supposed to be in a quiet year for me.
In a quiet year, in a bit of a downtime sort of.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, during lockdown, I've painted over 1,000 figures. I've completed.
I remember that,
And these are 28mm figures, of course. And now there are 3 armies been completed. In fact, I decided at the start of lockdown I wanted an Arab army, and I went to see Dave Ryan at Caliver, and acquired loads of Arabs from him, and then it just spawned from there. And I've completed that army. I've finished an Anglo-Norman army, which tagged onto the back end of a Byzantine army, and now I'm partway through a Republican Roman army, which is growing like topsy actually as we speak.
One thing I've noticed about yourself is that you seem to have a bit of almost every single period, pretty much in some scale or another. Do you have do you have a favourite period?
Well, I did, but I mean now it's with more time on my hands. It's becoming, there are several favourite periods, but my main period
over 30 years, 50 years.
From competitive gaming has been what would be known as Renaissance period. Right. So advent of gunpowder. So you'd be looking at late high medieval through till around about the end of the 1600s. So that encompasses the Italian wars, it encompasses the French wars of religion, and of course the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War. And I've got a large collection there.
Italian wars upward then kind of thing.
Absolutely. But then that morphs itself into getting involved in Siege of Vienna 1684, where I then thought, well, actually, this is almost getting into Malburian. I'll get some Malburian figures, and my Malburian armies are now vast as well. So that's about one large period. But one period I don't have a great deal of, although I like playing, I'll leave it up to Barry in that regard, is Napoleonic. I've not got a particularly large Napoleonic collection, mainly because I can't stand painting them. I find it very difficult, but too intricate.
I tell you what, as a sort of person who's now got a couple of years under my belt, and I've got a couple of armies, and I'm firing all cylinders, sort of thing. Napoleonic still scares me.
Yes, I think there is a
really does
factor in it. I like to paint systematically, so I like some form of uniformity, but I find Napoleonic is just a little too much uniform. I get carried away when you're onto the 30th set of straps, and you think, how many more to go through in the battalion, and look down the stuff on the painting deck. It's very off-putting in some respects. But that seems to be the sort of weakest in the set of collections. But a large ancient collection, large medieval collection, and as of about 5 years ago, a resurgence into that modern period, or World War II specifically, with a very large set of armies now for World War II Europe. At both ends of the conflict as well. Large 1939-40 German and British BAF stuff, and then at the other end of the spectrum, 44-45 North Europe, a lot of Brits, Americans, and
loads of Marines. I've seen some
and then
Marines.
of course now the recent excursion into the Pacific as well. So there's a fair bit of stuff there. And of course, good old American Civil War, which I've been playing again for the best part of 50 years. That tends to come back around on a regular basis. Never can really lose that one. So a bit of everything really.
I mean, another thing I thought is interesting is the number of rule sets, the number of rule sets I've seen you guys sort of mucking around with over the last couple of years. The fact that among yourselves you've written so many rule sets, and what would your advice be to somebody who, because I think there's being a bit of a niche hobby, I think to a sort of slightly curious beginner, there are some barriers, like, oh my god, how long does it take me to paint things? Oh my god, that looks fiddly. And then the rule sets might scare somebody. So what would your advice be to somebody who's just getting into learning rules and playing with them? What would you tell them to go out and buy or do?
To be quite honest, there's been this recent trend over the last few years of these lighter sets of rules. Where there are less tables, less lookups, and a lot of condensing and rationalizing
skirmish games kind of thing.
But there's an awful lot of dice throwing goes on. Obviously the rules I grow with over the last 50 years have gone through very simplistic terms through to the WRG led style of old school, what are now termed old school rules, through to the really complex rule sets that were from the Newbury sets back in the 80s and what have you. And then they sort of tended to ease off. But I find the more modern sets more complicated because they appear to me to have a few points lacking. But there are a lot of good pointers still available. The old Airfix guides are good if you can get them, and you can get them off Amazon. You may start to pay a fair price for them now, but you still find them turning up from further place. They did one on English Civil War, they did one on American Civil War, they did one on Napoleonic. I think there was one on World War II wargaming, and they've got some really easy sets of rules to get players into. And if you can get that under your belt and start to build up your confidence, you're well on the way, I think, to being able to tackle the sets of today. What does worry me is that I regularly see on social media you'll put up a post of a game that you're playing, or you'll put up a post of some new figures you've painted, and you'll always get, amongst all the comments, of people who'll congratulate you on a work, or they'll ask questions about what materials and paints particularly you've used. But somebody will, and it's not just on ours, I see it on other sites as well, somebody will always throw in a question, what rules are you using? And I always think, well, that's a very strange thing.
I always think that too, actually.
It seems to be completely out of place, but the frequency with it, which I'm seeing that now, does lead me to believe that there are people out there who are looking for inspiration or some guidance on what rules are probably going to suit them. The answer to it all is you play with whatever you want to play with, or whatever you and your opponent can get happy with. Don't make it overly complicated. And of course, most modern rules you'll see early in the sets of rules, you'll see a paragraph about, well, if you can't agree with it, just throw a dice. 1, 2, 3, it's your way.
Yeah,
Five,
I've seen
4,
that.
5, 6, your opponents.
Yeah.
But I mean that spawned partly the reason why Like a Stonewall started to publish its own rules. It was also due to the fact that most rules, until recently, were very much competitive wargaming orientated, with a lot of points values and a lot of army lists, and with system mechanics that were around competitive play. Well, Like a Stonewall, having 25 years ago moved into the demonstration games field, didn't really want to be demonstrating games at shows using a competitive set of rules. It just doesn't work that way. So we needed something which was quick and easy, but at the same time would give a really good or close to historical output. And so therefore we started to develop. The first set we did, Barry and I wrote the American Civil War set, which was entitled Like a Stonewall, which is where the group got its name from. Because our first demo game that the two of us put on was, believe it or not, Gettysburg in 28mm, which I remember that day vividly. It was a 32-foot long table by 16 or 18 foot wide and took up half the assembly room's upper foyer. And but it worked, and even for just two of us with a couple of sidekicks coming in and assist us over the weekend, the rule set worked, and from then on we were quite confident we could use the mechanics from one period to another and then change with the period specific. So a dozen different rule sets have come into play there: ancients, medieval, early medieval, high medieval, Renaissance, Mulburian, Napoleonic.
Yeah,
we've got a very popular set of Napoleonic rules, Die Hard, 57th Die Hard, which we've used for our Albuera game, which was our third game as a group on our third year of being. And I even got tempted. I would never write a set of World War II rules ever, because they are just too complicated if you're going to do it correctly. But I did get persuaded a few years ago to write a set of World War I 1914 Flanders rules, and they seem to have gone relatively okay. But I don't think they wouldn't transmute across for the later war and trench warfare.
They wouldn't switch over much, would they? I guess
that's something entirely different. Entirely. Yeah.
Right. So moving on to sort of the quicker fire stuff then, and moving on to the second half. Simple question, but why do you think you do it? Because you're very involved in it. It's obviously a huge part of your life. What do you get out of it? What have you gained from it?
Initially, if you'd have asked me that, why was I interested in it in the first instance? I think just like most kids at the time, an interest in war films or in history or in just model figures generally. But now I've found over the years it's been a great stress buster. Having had 40 years of quite high profile jobs, very intense, I always find it excellent to be able to get back of an evening finally and have an evening meal and then sit down for an hour of an evening and just completely chill out. Some people find it useful. That I found that to be very useful in two ways, because it did break the stress down and it would allow me an opportunity in the few scant moments of a day when I'd have time to let my mind drift. You could lock on to something, and that would be, what am I intending to paint tonight? And I would frequently find myself there being able to think, right, I did that last night, I've got this to do and that to do and what have you. And so it really was a great level. It brought your feet firmly down onto the floor, into the real world. But that in itself, then on the flip side of that, when it came around to sitting at the paint deck, it also allowed me to get a lot done in a short space of time, because a lot of the preamble had been done already in my mind.
In your head. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking as well, I mean, I suppose it must have been quite a shock to suffer a stroke, and you must have wondered, how is this going to impact on what I love? You know, I mean, that's,
you can't believe this. I mean, I've told this to a few people, and it's very selfish, but the stroke came from out of nowhere, as most of these things do, and thank God I'm still here and survived it. But once it had occurred and reality started to dawn on me, I was paralysed down my left side entirely. And rather selfishly, the first thing I thought as my family are around me in a hospital bed, thinking, "Oh my God, how am I going to paint?"
Yeah.
But that in itself was good, because it's the guys came round, wargamers and non-wargamers to that effect, and within a couple of weeks of being back home, I'd got at least half a dozen different jigs and setups and what have you, and artificial holding tools and God knows what. So I was able to start painting relatively quickly, just obviously using my right hand, but the grip was mechanical or artificial, fixed to
fixed to something.
Top. Yeah. Which in itself, I talk about it being a stress buster. Being able to paint and create armies and aim for projects to be completed, it was an unbelievable therapy for getting over the initial shock of the stroke. And it was weird also that my physio team as well, that came out to my house after release from hospital, picked upon, they spotted that some of the figures in the house, paint deck, and they focused on that as being a very good set of therapies.
Something to focus on.
So it was there, but I'd already set a few targets out for that, so it was useful, and it's been very good for me. Wargames have been very good for me in that regard as well, in terms of being able to get over what would have been a nasty setback.
It's just like an ideal little bit of rehabilitation sort of there already, isn't it, in a way?
But there's a lot to be said for wargaming in any case. I've known people who I game with, whose names will be not disclosed. Quite a lot of people who've had issues mentally over the last few years, certainly over the life of Like a Stonewall, more than I care to think about, really, who've had one problem or another, some being lasted longer than others, and wargaming with the group has been able to focus our attention away from the problems that are in their real world, and allow them to get a little bit of self-respect back, a little bit of organisation, a little bit of can-do attitude back when everything else seemed to be falling down around them. And
I mean, you say that. I mean, that's
a lot of people through in that regard.
Sure. I mean, I can see that. I can see how that would work, and that's something we're hoping to get into with this podcast / channel in the months ahead. That's definitely an avenue I want to go down, because it's not really been explored properly, I don't think.
No,
certainly not by Wargames Media. It's not really looked into.
No, it's true. Male mental health obviously is a big issue at the moment with the work that's being done in football. But I'm familiar with that Australian concept of men in sheds. And I know for a fact that men in sheds is not necessarily about wargaming. It's about guys of most ages being in an environment where they can speak about certain things, and where they can get some satisfaction out of producing things, arts, crafts, skills, whatever. Some that are dying out, some that are not. But there are two successful ones within spitting distance of where I live, and I just see Like a Stonewall and the wargaming element that comes with that as an extension of that men in sheds business generally.
It's like a natural incarnation of it in many ways, isn't
absolutely,
it?
Because in a group where you've got a project going, it's very intense, and you're breaking a workload down into individual tasks for people to do with timescales and what have you. It just generally, as a concept, that tends to start to structure people's lives. and it certainly structures their hobby time. And if all around is sort of falling down, there is still that continuity that's there. And I think it's still an area that's yet to be fully explored. I think wargaming can do an awful lot of people.
Yeah, I agree, actually. Yeah.
And who's to say after 2020 has been and gone, and this awful virus hopefully has been conquered, we may learn a few more lessons from what gaming can actually do for us in that regard.
Sure.
This is a path still yet to be trodden a little further before we know that. Yeah, certainly been very helpful for a lot of people, I know.
Yeah, definitely. So last couple of things then. So you sort of alluded to it earlier, but do you think the hobby is currently on the way up then? Do you think it's currently in a good place?
Yeah, I do. I think in fairness, Chris,
it feels like that as a
it does.
person.
It does. And again, lockdown may be interesting to see. I've been watching an awful lot of social media as to what people have been doing. There's been a Facebook page on entitled, I think it's called the Lockdown or Isolation Painting Challenge, and it's been great to see what people have been posting up there. I mean, there are one or two people who've been sort of posting every day for 130 odd days now, and I'm thinking that is some serious painting output. And if you're listening, Dan, you must be a madman. You know who I'm talking to. Yeah, and there might be 6mm figures, Dan, but you're still going at it.
He's still doing it.
Songs. He is indeed. But there are one or two others around the world, people I know, who've been using it very wisely. And certainly there's a good lot of work being done in that regard.
Sure.
But it shows me that there is a lot still to be had out of wargaming. I did think for a time when video games proper started to take off in the 90s and into the noughties, that there could actually be a serious detrimental effect on the hobby.
Yeah, they were.
It's so easy to just get yourself a game for 50, 60 quid, plug it into your system, start, and you've suddenly got it there, plug and play, 3D graphics of fantastic quality, total interaction. You know, you're getting the same stimulus as you're getting from playing a war game without having to sit down and quietly.
I realised it.
Yeah, it's very much out of the box and away you go. But in recent years, it's been good to see a lot of people who are coming back, who might in their earlier years, you know, into the 40s now, settling down with families, rediscovering war games and what they did when they started in their teens. Excuse me. And I see that a lot of people, and more importantly as well, they're coming back not just into fantasy type games, not into the pure mainstream Games Workshop stuff, but they are starting to look about and find historical gaming.
Yeah.
So many people are coming across now. I mentioned Infamy. There's a massive Facebook page in a very short space of time.
Very big following, doesn't it? Like
really taken off there, and I'm watching that with some
momentum
interest.
is the word I'd use.
Yeah, when I took a retirement 5 years ago, I got into a local hobby shop did a few gaming tables with it nearby. With a view to looking at a lot of people who were coming back and see if they could migrate across from fantasy into ancients, because there's a lot of similarity there. I remember the days when ancient rules started to have a fantasy supplement attached to them. They go all the way to Tony Bath, they do, and Donald Featherstone to some degree. But I also think that's where, I know for a fact that's where Dungeons and Dragons came from. There were links off there. And I wondered if you could actually work the other way back. And I set myself a little task working with some of the people who were in that gaming shop and group and trying to use Hail Caesar from Warlord Games as a means to get them through it. It worked to some respect. We did pick up 2 or 3 players who did make the jump quite successfully, but we perhaps annoyingly, we missed a couple that had previously been trying to find an outlet for that and couldn't get anybody else to be sort of playing in the area. And they'd sort of given up hope and then left just before started that little project. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for the fact that it is alive and kicking. And there will be one or two sets of rules which will start to invoke a little bit of interest and hopefully take it on to the next stage.
Sure.
Go on. I was going to say as well, developments as well around sustainability. The fact that lead obviously is expensive, is finite. Migration into plastics, what was one time a really expensive production would be a set of plastic figures. It would appear that the manufacturing costs there are starting to reduce. Obviously, plastic as a material rather than lead.
Yeah,
it's so much easier to work with and and cheaper and what have you. But obviously now we've got a good question sitting over plastics. So I don't know, but I have been watching with some interest the migration that's starting into resin, and I'm not entirely sure I understand where that goes. It's trying to do it looks to me to be a very expensive plastics alternative, and I'm not too sure
what the point is.
Achieve. I don't understand it.
Nor me yet, not quite.
No, if you can get a good quality casting, but you can do in plastic nowadays. But you can do in metal equally so.
So if it's not going to be any better quality or cheaper, what is the point? Yeah,
exactly. I don't understand what its unique selling point is. That's yet to be explained to me. I think
I can understand that.
Yeah.
The last thing then would be, so there's somebody listening to this who has maybe recently started. They're maybe a few months in, and they're feeling a bit scared about going out and finding a group or starting to play around the set of rules, or maybe they're just listening to this and they're just about to go out and buy something. What would you say to them to encourage them to take that next step and get stuck into it?
Use the advantages now of social media. Facebook pages now are just so full of good content, painting guides, inspiration, rules queries, all sorts of things. Get in there, have a look around, and most importantly, get attached to those groups and don't be afraid to ask the question, where are you? Obviously, people are posting from around the world.
Sure.
But over these last couple of years, I've come across loads of people who are within 40, 50 miles of me who are out there with a limited set of, if any, opponents who are desperate to attach themselves to a group or other individuals who've got like-minded views on wargaming, wanting opponents, and it's basically on your doorstep. The world's your oyster there in that regard. So use the increased communication powers of social media, but also use and support your local hobby shop or game shop or even crafts and painting shops. So you will find people start to post or leave business cards or notes behind the counter as to who's available and what groups are there. And where there are gaming shops who've got facilities to war game, certainly get involved there. Or if you're lucky enough to have a local war games club, get yourself along to that. Nobody buys. I mean, I did it at the tender age of 10, going on 11. So if that can be done, I'm sure a lot of other people can do it. But certainly use that facility that's out there. Don't sit about pondering as to how you're going to do it all on your own.
Yeah,
absolutely. And don't try and do everything all at once. I'm still 50 years in on painting techniques. I'm still learning today.
Yeah, you're still, even after 50 years, there's still stuff that you see you discovering and still enjoying it, still getting loads out of it. Yeah,
absolutely. There's always something new to learn every day. As far as the background research on getting everything to your tabletop's concerned. Yeah, definitely.
Well, there you go. Well, that's been hugely interesting, Tim. We could go on forever. We could go on forever, and there's loads of stuff I haven't asked you, but I know we haven't got all night. So I'll say thank you very much. We'll perhaps have you back for another episode if these things take off and so on and so forth. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.